Dominic Ongwen, a brigade commander of the Senior Brigade of the Lord's Resistance Army, was found guilty at the International Criminal Court in The Hague of 61 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity committed in Uganda between the 1st of July 2002 and the 31st of December 2005. He was found guilty of a number of attacks on civilian populations in the IDP camps of Pajule, Odek, Lukodi, and Abok, conscripting children under the age of 15 and using them to participate actively in hostilities. A number of sexual and gender-based crimes against 7 women who were abducted and placed into his household, as well as against girls and women within the Senior Brigade. The chamber found that these crimes were committed in the context of the armed rebellion of the Lord's Resistance Army against the government of Uganda. The LRA, including Dominic Ongwen, perceived the civilians living in northern Uganda as associated with the government of Uganda, and thus as the enemy. This concerned in particular those who lived in government-established IDP camps. The chamber found that Dominic Ongwen committed these crimes as a fully responsible adult and as a commander of the LRA in his mid to late 20s. Furthermore, the chamber did not find evidence that supported the claim he suffered from any mental disease or disorder during the period relevant to the charges, or that he committed these crimes under duress or under any threats. In this program, Fadi El Abdallah, the spokesperson of the International Criminal Court, is answering questions received after the verdict.
Is the verdict final, and what will be the next steps?
The verdict, as well as sentencing decisions, can be appealed by the prosecution and the defense before the appeals chamber, composed of 5 judges different from those who considered that case in the pretrial and trial phases. Proceedings before the appeals chamber may be lengthy. Following this verdict, the chamber will receive submissions of the parties and participants on the appropriate sentence to be imposed on Dominic Ongwen. Furthermore, a phase dedicated to the reparations for the victims will be opened.
What are the possible outcomes of an appeal?
The ICC Appeals Chamber may confirm, amend, or reverse the verdict and/or sentence decided by the trial chamber. If the Appeals Chamber's decision leads to the acquittal of Mr. Ongwen, the Appeals Chamber decision is final and the proceedings before the court will end. In this case, if reparations proceedings has started in parallel with the appeal, they will also come to an end, since reparations can only be awarded when the accused is found guilty. However, some victims may still obtain support for the harm they have suffered through the Trust Fund for Victims Assistance mandate. If the outcome of the Appeals Chamber's decision is that Mr. Ongwen is guilty, the reparations phase may start or continue if it had already started before the trial chamber.
In case of appeal, can victims participate in this appeal?
The victims' lawyers do not have the right to appeal a conviction or acquittal decision, but will be able to present the views and concerns of the victims before the ICC appeals judges. Should there be an appeal, the appeals chamber would then decide whether more possible victims would be then allowed to participate in the appeals proceedings. Depending on this eventual decision, additional activities will then be planned to reach out to these victims to provide them with information and facilitate their participation should they decide to exercise their rights at that stage.
What sentence may be pronounced against Mr. Ongwen?
The sentence will be pronounced by the judges in due course after receiving submissions from parties and participants on this matter. The judges may impose in a separate decision a prison sentence to which a fine or forfeiture of the proceeds, property, and assets derived directly or indirectly from the crime committed may be added. The maximum sentence is 30 years. However, when justified by the extreme gravity of the crime and the individual circumstances of the convicted person, the court may impose a term of life imprisonment. There is no death penalty at the ICC.
If sentenced to a prison sentence, where would Mr. Ongwen serve his term?
In case a prison sentence is decided, the court will decide where the sentence will be served. Persons convicted of crimes under the jurisdiction of the ICC do not serve their sentence at the ICC detention center in The Hague, as the facility is not designed for long-term imprisonment. Convicted persons are therefore transferred to a prison in a state designated by the court from a list of states which have indicated their willingness to allow convicted persons to serve their sentence there. The court has enforcement of sentences agreements with 10 countries: Austria, the United Kingdom, Belgium, Finland, Denmark, Serbia, Mali, Norway, Argentina, and Sweden. However, there is also a possibility of agreements with other countries for individual cases.
Will the court support Mr. Ongwen's family to visit him in the state where he would be serving his sentence?
During the period in detention in The Hague, the ICC ensures family visits from immediate family of indigent detained persons through the Trust Fund for Family Visits. Whether or not this support will extend to visits in a state that would agree to receive Mr. Ongwen for imprisonment will have to be decided at a later stage if the convictions become final and the sentence as well as the location for this detention are decided and became final.
When are reparations proceedings expected to start?
A phase dedicated to the reparations to victims of the crimes for which Mr. Ongwen was convicted will start in due course. Reparations proceedings may start at the same time as the appeal. However, if at the end of the appeal Mr. Ongwen is found not guilty, proceedings at the court will end, including any reparation proceedings that had started. If the appeal confirmed the conviction of Mr. Ongwen, the reparations phase may continue or start.
Can victims seek reparations?
Victims of the crimes for which Mr. Ongwen was found guilty who have participated in the proceedings can receive reparations if they wish so. Other victims of these crimes have also the right, if they wish so, to seek reparations. The ICC judges will issue decisions setting the procedure for the reparations phase, including what steps victims need to follow in order to request reparations, and the conditions that need to be met for reparations to be awarded.
What will the reparations consist of?
If awarded, reparations can be on an individual or collective basis, or both, whichever is in the judge's view the most appropriate for the victims in this particular case. Reparations may include monetary compensation, return of property, rehabilitation of rights lost, psychological rehabilitation, or medical support, victims' services centers, or symbolic measures such as apologies or memorials. After consultations with all relevant stakeholders, including victims' defense and the Trust Fund for Victims, the judges may decide what type of reparations can be awarded for the victims in the Ongwen case.
What is the Trust Fund for Victims, and how does it relate to the International Criminal Court?
In 2002, the Trust Fund for Victims and the International Criminal Court were both created by the Rome Statute. The ICC is responsible for investigating and prosecuting criminal cases, whereas the Trust Fund's mission is to respond to victims and the harm caused by crimes under the ICC jurisdiction. The Trust Fund upholds the rights of victims and their families through two mandates. One, the reparations, meaning implementing court-ordered reparations for victims in cases where the perpetrator is convicted by the ICC judges. And the assistance mandate, meaning to provide assistance to victims and their families in the countries where the ICC has opened investigation. And that can be through the provision of psychological rehabilitation, physical rehabilitation, and material support programming. It is possible in certain situations that assistance and reparation programs run concurrently in the country. They cover different issues and do not exclude each other.